Welcome back to the program. With me now, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Steve Ciobo, and the Shadow Employment Minister, Brendan O'Connor. Gentlemen, good morning to you, Steve Ciobo. It was a powerful contribution from the Foreign Minister there at the UN this morning, and the government securing a unanimous vote in support of that resolution.
Look, we welcome the unanimous vote of the Security Council overnight, Kieran. This is part of Australia's very strong international efforts and the Prime Minister's leadership on this in relation to MH17. Of course, Australia still grieves. We still feel the pain for the families who lost loved ones. We know that there's 37 victims of this, people that call Australia home, and we of course are very focused on as quickly and as effectively as possible holding both Russia but also the Russian-backed rebels in the Ukraine to account to make sure that we can get access, have unfettered access to the site, do a thorough investigation, identification, and then of course repatriate the deceased at the end of that process.
During the Foreign Minister's contribution, she provided some of the personal stories of those lost in the MH17 disaster. Let's hear a little of that now.
Yesterday, I spoke to a husband and wife from Perth who had been on a family holiday in Europe. They had decided to stay on for only a couple of days while their 3 children, aged 12, 10 and 8, had to return to school in Australia, so they went on ahead with their grandfather on flight MH17. The parents are inconsolable in their grief.
It's one of the many heartbreaking stories out of this atrocity. Brendan O'Connor, the Russians agreeing to this investigation at the UN. It does seem like the early stages of cooperation on the ground as well, with the rebels handing over the black boxes, recorders to international authorities.
That's the first step, Kieran. The unanimous resolution by the UN Security Council was an important step. As the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition have said, of course, in the end this will come down to the response by President Putin in terms of fulfilling and realising the elements of this resolution. This is really saying, firstly, that we need to make sure we have a safe, secure, unrestricted access to the site, and that's, of course, later than it should have been. And, of course, as importantly, we want to see an independent inquiry where everybody participates fully. Now, that's the elements of the resolution, and we're pleased that's passed, but all eyes of the world now turn to the President of Russia in terms of his response to this situation. And as the Leader of the Opposition said and the Prime Minister said, this is a test of decency and a test that the Russians must pass.
Steve Ciobo, the UK Prime Minister is going to urge European leaders when the EU leadership meets this week to consider toughening economic sanctions. How likely is that, and is really that the only sort of justice that we can expect, or should we anticipate that individuals will be held accountable for this atrocity?
Well, Kieran, I certainly am of the view that individuals should be held accountable. I know that that's the view of the Prime Minister, and of course Australia's efforts are focused upon that. I mean, there's, I guess, a couple of parts to this. The first is the grieving process. The first is to make sure that edification happens, that a thorough investigation can take place unfettered, and then of course in time the repatriation of the deceased back to Australia. We then need to make sure that Russia lives up to the words that Vladimir Putin had with Prime Minister Abbott when he indicated that Russia would cooperate fully. That's also what, of course, the Security Council resolution overnight indicates. Now, if Russia delivers on that, then that's a positive step forward. But I believe that not only Australia, but the international community, and we saw some strong support out of President Obama as well as the Secretary of State John Kerry overnight. The world is watching what Russia's doing now, and ultimately those that caused this tragedy should be brought to account and should be brought to justice, because you know it's just such a terrible thing that's happened here, and there's just so much grieving and so much senseless slaughter which frankly didn't need to happen.
And Brendan O'Connor, you would agree with that 100%. I guess there is some scepticism, though, whether the Europeans will go as hard as they should do in terms of economic sanctions as well, because if, well, as we suspect, the Russians, separatists were behind this, shouldn't there be a greater justice than just the individuals concerned? Obviously, they should be held to justice, but shouldn't it be broader than that?
Well, I certainly, I think it's fair to say we welcome the strong words of the British Prime Minister, but let's now see. We've now got a resolution. It's been unanimous, therefore including the support of the Russian government. It's now incumbent on the Russian President to respond, to realise this resolution, and of course, if that were not to happen, then I'm sure there has to be further deliberations. This is now a test for the Russian President, and as Steve said, world leaders have made it very clear what they expect, and we would hope that the Russian President does exactly that.
Brendan O'Connor, Steve Ciobo, gentlemen, thank you for that. It has been a difficult few days for the nation. I appreciate your thoughts on it this morning.